Well, good morning. I don't know if you'll be able to understand me or not.
I can understand you. It's tough, but I can.
That's good. I have a choice between, I'm using a little tiny notebook computer. And so I have sort of a choice between video or audio.
Okay.
Got very little CPU. So how are you?
I'm okay. A little bit sad I don't have a guest for today's event, but what can I do?
Yeah, I was looking forward to hearing Bob Bernanke, and it sounds as though there was some disagreement.
Yes and no. I mean, it's very fair what he's saying. So I asked, he first agreed to appear here. And then he wanted to know a little bit about like how does it actually work. So I told him he should have a look at some of the previous episodes to see how people have been doing it. And he came back to me with, I think it was 3 points that he made on why he at this point would refuse to take part instead, or like retract his offer to take part. And all 3 points are very good. And his first point was that except for Gita, then there have been no women at all. And he feels that we should address the gender imbalance. He said that there are a good number of women working in the APL world. And then the second point he made was that this event, it dwells entirely on the past. And he says that we have a serious problem on Earth right now, and we can't afford to look at the past. We have to look to the future. And thirdly, which a bit extends the second point, that what he does now is working on compilers to help domain specialists and scientists dealing with climate change. And so he doesn't want to look to the past. He wants to look to the future and not be held back by old things from APL. So, I mean, then meaning he still wants an APL-like thing, but just not old APL. And since the whole raison d'etre of this event is looking at the past, well, yeah, I can understand.
Gee, I'm sorry he didn't come and discuss that. I mean, those do sound like sort of valid points, but they don't sound like particularly great reasons for not showing up and discussing them. I mean, but I mean, he's certainly right that you know, the participation of women in APL activities lately has been very small. I don't know if you even know Nancy Wheeler directly.
Yeah, I don't really know directly. And
I mean, she was certainly an important participant in organizing APL 91, and but getting her to come to an APL bug meeting is like pulling teeth. Let's see, she did come to the APL bug meeting with John McGrew and Jim Brown a few years ago. But I think that's the last time she's actually come to an APL bug meeting. And you know, I can't think of anybody else who's been, you know, actually any women that have been actually active in the APL bug.
Well, so I took him up on what he had said, that there were a good number of women like that. So asking, because the guests here are those that have had an influence on, mainly people have had influence in APL's development. And so he came back to me with 4 names, I think it was 3 names, oh 4, of women that would be relevant, none of which I'd ever heard about before. He also tried to contact one of them directly. And then I've enlisted Gita in trying to get hold of the other 3. So
okay, so he's sort of working on it. That's good.
Yeah, it's not a the type of criticism where people just say, okay, fix it, but are not helping in fixing it. He actually did provide names of a good number of people. So I'll try, but it is very hard in general to get people to be guests on this kind of thing. And I'll bug Gita again. I haven't heard from her since then. It's a week and a half ago, but she's of course busy with stuff. So I don't know. I haven't advertised this event because I really didn't know what was going to be here. And it's 1 week out of the normal schedule. I don't know if anybody showed up last week when I couldn't be here, but
You know, you did make that pretty clear on the schedule.
yeah. But, you know, people can get used to the schedule. I try to stick to it the best I can, but to every 4 weeks. But this.
Now, is the next meeting, the next APL
mean-
Campfire 4 weeks from today?
No,
or
3 weeks from today. Going back to
We're going to stick to the every 4 weeks.
yeah, just
count-
this
starting
being
from
an
the beginning.
yeah, just this being an exception. That's all.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we missed the last one. That was sort of the first anniversary of APL Campfire.
Yeah, we didn't mention anything, but yeah. It's true. Yeah, that's still pretty good. I haven't done. So that means we have 12, 13 guests. That's pretty good.
I wasn't even supposed to be here this morning. I was supposed to be on a tour of Portland's Union Station and a rail museum. I'm in Portland, Oregon. Lucille and I are both here in Portland, Oregon, for the Society for Industrial Archaeology's
Okay.
conference. But they delayed. I'll have to leave early. Well, we may end up just giving up very early.
Yeah,
But-
if nobody shows up and then nobody has anything to say, then yeah. Let's see. That's okay. I mean, I realized in the beginning that I couldn't keep this up forever, of course. But well,
we've got Paul Jackson.
connecting to audio. Give him a second. It looks rather frozen to me.
It can take a while to get everything working.
It can. I'll try in the next 3 weeks to contact people again. Let's see. I should have keep better track of who I'm trying to get. It's the kind of the thing I do on the side, this whole thing.
Well, Paul, we see your face.
Well, but only as a single snapshot, not.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's not moving. You're right.
But now we can hear you at least. That's something. Oh, now Curtis, I have your face, but no sound anymore. We can't have everything, huh?
Yes, I get to choose between seeing or speaking.
That's
So
all your
it's-
computer can handle. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Paul experienced that very early on when we first started doing things on Zoom. I had this little Linux machine, which I still do. It's very, very handy, but it just doesn't have the CPU power to handle a lot in Zoom.
Right.
No, I think we saw a moving picture.
For a moment. Oh yeah, there we go. Now we can. Now we don't hear anything though. To be fair, Zoom does seem to be very heavy. I have a monster
So I
left.
seem to be moving now.
Yeah, and speaking at the same time. I have a monster laptop and even in Zoom can bring it to its knees anyways.
But my tablet is just horrifically fast for something I carry around in my hand.
Well, I can carry my laptop in my hand, but it hurts pretty quickly.
It doesn't hurt to carry this thing. It's extremely light. And what's really painful to watch is Joey used to price our I think by the time I joined, we were just about to get rid of the Amdahl V6 and go to an Amdahl V8. And I vividly remember the way we dealt with pricing differences is we continued to price as if we had an IBM Model 145. So we had some huge multiplier by the time I joined. And it turned out Amdahl was one of our customers. They called me up and wanted to know what a computer resource unit was. So we did the arithmetic and found out they were paying us something like $60,000 a CPU hour.
Oof.
And since their internal charges for a CPU hour was $600, they wanted to know, could they bring Sharp APL in-house?
Wow. Wow, prices have come down.
Prices have definitely come down. Are you going to try to do a little talking? Do we have, I heard that Bob had canceled.
Yeah, Bob had canceled and I didn't have time to get somebody else. Meanwhile, so that's why I didn't really advertise this a whole lot. Not on my own, at least. Curtis did some advertising of it because I don't want to waste people's time. I don't know what's gonna happen. But hey, Paul, if you have more stories to tell, I'm all ears.
I'd be happy to chat if people can stand listening to me.
Of course you can.
One of the things that I've found interesting, but just about the time somebody on the news group, I forgot what the internet name is for the APL use group.
comp.lang.apl, that thing?
Could be. I follow it via Google. I don't
Yeah.
no longer have access to Unix systems, but Google gives me access to anything I want access to, and I still get those. And somebody had asked some question that clearly was answerable by the fact of this whole hoopla over does APL have vector notation for
Oh.
constant?
Wait,
And
is that recent? Somebody asked this?
yeah, just a couple days ago.
That's funny. I thought I
Maybe.
subscribed to like get notifications, but clearly didn't because I can see things have happened the last couple of months. And I didn't. Oh, most of it is spam.
Maybe that's why you're ignoring it, but I don't seem to get the spam. I don't know whether I've got my filters turned high enough or what. I was about to jump in and explain because I had already done some research on the Dyalog system and was delighted to learn that you guys didn't follow IBM down the rabbit hole.
About what?
It's one of the few systems that doesn't rip apart a vector on the right-hand argument when you're dealing with conjunction.
Yeah, yes, that's true.
In fact, the way you do it is the exact same way you do it both in IPSA's APL and in J. You provide something like I forget what they're even called in APL, basically I think them as the stop functions.
Yeah, the right and
argument,
left.
return the left argument, and so forth.
Or just
And
same. Yeah.
yeah. And before I could jump in, thinking I'll straighten this guy out, Jim Brown and Bob Smith started having a dialogue with the fella, and they actually pointed out the same thing that I'd already discovered, namely that you guys didn't follow the standard APL2 approach to how to deal with numeric vectors.
Right.
Actually, I've been meaning to try that on character vectors, but I haven't found the chance to do it because I've actually got to go to PC, and the only PCs I own are actually owned by my kids. And it takes quite a hassle for me to go try either your well, I can try your system online on Try APL,
Yes, you
but I
can.
can't try Bob Smith's system
Right.
online, and don't have a copy of APL2 anymore. But anyway, they explained to the poor fellow why things weren't working the way he expected it, and gave him nice examples, and then pointed out that APL2 and NARS 2000 followed that standard, and you guys did not. So
So
actually,
Curtis
I
is asking
like
if,
that.
yeah, if Roger Hui was a connection between that. Roger came in so late, and that decision, and APL, Dialog APL had operators taking array operand very early on. I think from version 1, but if not, then
Mhm.
very early. So that decision had to be made very early. If I understand it right, APL2 refrained from adding certain operators in the NAR standard because of that issue. Like, didn't want to go there. So if you define your own operators that need it, then it takes a stance. But there aren't any primitive operators that run into this problem.
That have it, yeah.
And in Dialog, with character arrays, it's exactly the same as with numeric arrays or any other array. There's only one thing in Dialog that is stronger than stranding, and that is dotting into names in objects. So if you have two object names, A and B, and you write AB.C, then that is a strand of A and B.C. So there, the dotting is stronger than the stranding. But that's the only thing I think that's
But
stronger
that's
than
part of
stranding.
name formation, am I right? You've basically got objects in your APL.
Yeah,
right?
yes, no, it's basically, it really is objects, fully object oriented in that sense. And you could say that it's part of name formation, in which case,
Well, that's how it strikes me. I
yeah,
appreciate that. I am a bit of a bigot on language definition, and so sometimes I say things that everybody else goes, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I go, "Well, I was there at the foundation, and I know what the fucking rules are."
yeah, but you're
Um,
absolutely right on this. And it is, I mean, you should see it as name formation. It is exactly what you want in by far the most cases. If you want to dot into two names at once, then you would have to parenthesize them. So open paren, AB, close
I
paren,
mean,
dot
we
C.
thought of trying that. That's clever. But then I don't use your system enough. Most of the objects with dot names I learned from playing with .NET languages like Visual Basic and C#.
And those are exactly the two languages that were role models for Dialog's array object orientation.
And I appreciate that. I actually wrote a whole APL in .NET, and I never took it very far, but I was able to get enough of a performance increase by having actually compiled APL. When I say compiled, I literally take the statements you do and turn them into .NET language. And that's what gets compiled. Not what you wrote, what I turned it into as expressions. And if I put that together with the knowledge that some functions have what, well, it was already there in APL 360 and Jim took it over to APL2, this notion that you can cheat on scan if you know that your function has a logical inverse. So instead of running the equation multiple times, you can just get it done left to right.
Yeah, sure. So that's used in minus scan and division scan.
Yep, exactly.
And even
and others, those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But I did go look up APL2's list of functions and provide it all into this compiler.
there are others
And
that
at
you
the
could
time,
do, but
it was very fast.
Yeah.
I did some timings compared to, it was either your system or Bob's system, I forget which, but somebody didn't have those tricks in yet. And I blew them away with a compiled version that knew about those tricks. But on the other hand, I didn't do any of the fancy tricks that Bob helped create with, if you keep your binaries in bits, you can play some horrendously fast games with doing work, because you can come up with translate tables that do Boolean scans.
Yeah, so Dialog does all of that. It does do fast scans interesting. It doesn't do fast reductions though, but that's whatever.
That's lovely.
Yeah, it's very, very annoying, but that's how it is. So
Well, actually, I forget whether it was IPSA or STSC. I think it must have been STSC. The first APL conference I attended was in Atlanta, and Jim, what was his name? Guy who'd gone to work for, I can't remember what he went to work for. Not Jim Brown, the other Jim. Anyway, he'd written his own APL and was just impressed as hell as how fast they were doing reductions on Booleans, and they were.
oh yeah, that yes. And when I said that we don't do it on reduction, there's particularly one annoying reduction that's not optimized. That is plus reduction. And so if plus does not have in a computer does not have any of the nice properties that it does in mathematics. Right? You cannot just choose the order of you add numbers together because you have losses on floating point operations.
Right.
And so some financial companies apparently do a grand plus scan, the plus reduction on people's money on floats. Yeah, I know. You can't use floats on money, but you kind of have to sometimes.
Yes, I'm painfully aware of that problem.
Yeah. So and then so what happens is that the unoptimized plus reduction was not implemented really strictly according to spec. Right? If you are to really be strict about it, then plus reduction means put a plus in between all the elements and then evaluate as an APL expression. That means from right to left.
That logically is what it's published as meaning.
Right. But so it was two issues. One is Dialog for some reason implemented it left to right instead of right to left. That's not right. That doesn't follow the spec. Secondly,
but they're not alone in that. Both STSC and IPSA did that.
So that might be why they did it then. I don't know. But so to give the same result so people could carry over the code and not change the amount of money in people's accounts. But not only that, the other problem is on modern day hardware, we have vector instructions and we can add a whole bunch of numbers at once. Except we can't because that would change the result because it matters which order you do putting additions in. And so plus slash is actually slow on floats or on overflowing integers. And if you want fast summation, you can use one base instead. Because if you evaluate in unary any vector of numbers, then that's the same thing as summation.
Oh, that's clever.
But there we never make any promises about the order that things are being evaluated in.
No, so
we can do whatever. We can just do it fast.
You get the answer.
and happily, APL uses Iverson's old way that encode and decode have to match plus dot times. So in J that was changed to be supposedly more leading axis oriented, but really, I mean, I like the APL way too, where each major cell, or so if it's a matrix, each vector represents one digit position in big endian format. And that means that a one base sums vertically, that is a first axis summation. So you can use that with the rank operator to govern exactly what you want to do and keep the speed. So that's actually key. But it's a bit weird, the thing about plus. So if you write a cover function for plus and then you sum, then you get a different result than if you just use plus. I mean, it's almost to the point where I would say, like, if you try to sum or even add two floats, It's certainly sum, but maybe even adding two floats, you should give a domain error. Like you can't sum floats. It just doesn't work like that. That's not how computers work.
Oh, that's one attitude to take. I think you get a little bit of feedback for that one.
But you really can't, right? It's a lie. Whenever you sum
Oh,
three,
I agree that it's a lie.
sum
but
three
it's a
floats, and
lie
you're telling a
that's
lie
well
already.
accepted in the industry long before APL came along.
Yeah, it's
The
true.
attitude, if we take the attitude that these numbers are numbers, even though we know damn well they're not accurate over any much use. In fact, in the early days of Fortran, there were warnings in the early manuals to not use. There was a way you could do a one-word float, and there was actually an example in the very first course I took of an explanation in the manual that said, warning, this is very risky. And they showed a couple of examples where you start going really bad after half a dozen calculations. And you're no longer anywhere as close to the right answer, because if you don't have at least a double word float, you don't have a prayer of coming close to the right answer.
No, and summing floats. I did one day. I sat down.
Any operation with floats, you start
Yeah,
doing arithmetic with floats, and you only have a 32-bit operand, you're screwed. They had 2 or 3 examples in the book for a beginner to say, don't ever do this. Yeah, Fortran will let you say it's a one-word float instead of, this is back when a word was 4 bytes. And you're going to start getting bad answers so quick, it's pointless.
yeah. So yeah, the small
I don't
difference
think they
between
were
two.
doing summing, they were doing multiplies and stuff.
Yeah, then it can
calculating.
explode. But one day I sat down with Marshall Lockbaum when he was still working for Dialog, and we wrote code for summing floats correctly, summing floats. Which actually, maybe we should publish a paper on that or something, because I've seen that like algorithm J now has some variant thing you can set on summation to make it sum floats more accurately. And I see various algorithms online for summing floats with different strategies and what their downsides are. And I believe that we actually wrote the APL code to sum floats correctly, to actually give the correct result. It took us many iterations, and there were bugs in our code. So when I showed it to Roger Hui, he noticed some things that were wrong. But eventually, after the 3 of us had a combined mental power, I think we managed to write code that correctly sums floats. I'll put it into the chat here. It is one incomprehensible piece of APL.
Oh, is that what I just saw briefly come up there?
Yeah, you probably see a notification. You should be able to open the
It
chat.
had the downgrade and stuff in it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it is
Okay, so you order them so that
that's not
the
enough.
thing-
And
I
naive
understand,
thing.
that's just a step in it to make
Yeah.
sure that
That's the
the
very final
small
step.
effect values are handled before the big effect values, so that their effect can gather together.
Right. That's the very last step in the process. But before that, you can't just do that. You can't just order by magnitude and sum together. It doesn't work like that. So what it does, it takes the logarithm of the numbers to find out which bracket they need to go in, which order of magnitude they need to go in, and then it groups them by order of magnitude.
Oh,
And then
okay.
it's safe to sum them. So then it sums each order of magnitude numbers together. And then it repeats the process, because now each sum from an order of magnitude might itself have some arbitrary order of magnitude. So you need
Right.
to just repeat that process
I got it.
until
That's
all
clever
numbers
as
have
hell.
a single order of magnitude.
Congratulations.
And then you can do, but that has an interesting thing. That means that our summation on floats has unknown complexity.
Yes.
It
Understood.
is impossible to determine in advance. We know that it will terminate eventually.
We know it'll terminate, but you
But we
don't
don't know
how many
when.
times it's gonna iterate.
Nope. It could be any number. It could be n, or it could be less than n. We don't know. That it need, and for each one of those, of course, is complex, right? Because in that we're using the key operator. So that means we're classifying everything. That itself is, I don't know, some to n log n thing that it needs to do over and over and over again, potentially n times. So it's n times log n. So, or something like that on that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a huge potential.
and then there's a set operation.
But
'cause
at least you come up with a high level of confidence that the answers are correct.
Oh yeah, sure. We had in every step of the process, you need to eliminate zeros as well. Because you can't take the logarithm of 0 and it doesn't contribute to the total sum either.
Doesn't contribute to the sum anyway.
So we can just remove those, but removing those is a set operation. That's potentially very expensive. Right? If you have zeros dispersed all over the place, then you need to rewrite everything in memory. Traversing the entire array element by element, removing all the zeros is expensive on a lot of zeros, a lot of numbers. So every time around the loop, we need to remove all the zeros. That's a whole write operation looking at every element. And then doing one of the most expensive, I would assume, arithmetic operations, the logarithm on them. And then we need to classify these floats. And classifying floats is expensive as well.
I think of log as tables, but that's only from my training, not because I ever really learned how to do logarithms by hand.
Yeah, I don't know how to put. I mean, it's probably built in somewhat in the floating point units these days, but
Well, I know there's
anyway.
not a table big enough, so I know it's not really done by tables inside, but I don't know how it's done.
You
at
can't
all.
just do it by tables because there are a lot of
No, but again,
floats.
it might be a starting place, and then there could be an iteration to find
Yeah,
out
that's
the real
true.
answer. But I
Yeah.
don't really know. But I'm quite certain at least the one piece of code that I do know backwards and forward is APL 360, because long before I had access to anything, I had access to the source of APL 360. So whenever I couldn't determine exactly how something worked externally when I was teaching advanced courses in APL, I would actually go look at the code and find out, well, what the hell did they do here? And what is this algorithm? And since initially I was much more facility with similar language than I was with APL, that switched at some point, I could figure out, oh, I get what they're looking at. I think I mentioned in the previous time I spoke that the early idea of fuzz wasn't the formal definition that Paul Berry publishes at all. It was literally hacking off the last few bits,
Oh
because
dear.
having a floating point moves 4 bits at a time. And so throw away those last 4 bits and pretend they don't exist.
And then they formalized it as being multiplication of the largest term with the comparison tolerance.
Yeah. It's switched entirely. It's a much more complex algorithm.
But
And
that
I
has
do
problems.
remember when I joined IPSA, Bernanke was inveighing about how things like iota and epsilon on floats was an absolute nightmare, because you couldn't just look at the values to see if they were identical. You had to apply quad CT. And so
Yeah.
getting functions that in many situations are blindingly fast were just complete crap if we were doing it on floating point numbers.
Yeah, that's true. Again, floats are bad. They're very reliant on floats, but they're absolute pain in a lot of things.
Well,
And again,
Roger
comparing floats, right?
added extended precision and rationals, so you can carry fractions and you can carry extended precision numbers and do all the APL arithmetic. I call it APL, all the J arithmetic on those things.
Yeah, well, until you try to. Sorry?
I played around with that when I did the compiler, simply because the support was in .NET, and so I tried using some of their routines, but I never bothered to tie it in as a supported data type for all operations. I just tried it for a few, but I found it interesting. What I really found interesting when I started working with Roger, when I finally gave up on APL and I gave up on my own APL, I should say. What was going on was that since I'd retired and I'd gotten tired of my son melting down laptops playing video games on them, I went to a tablet, both for that and also to be out and about and doing computing with a device that I could just hold in my hand. And so I was looking for ways to do computing on a laptop, and right about that time, Jay was beginning to have
I mean, on a tablet. You wanted to take
on
APL
a
with you on a
tablet.
tablet. Yeah.
Yes, I keep using the wrong name for that. And they were beginning to work on having an Android version of Jay, so I helped them debug that. And then subsequently, actually even before I started that, Roger had given myself and Nick a copy of his quad divide algorithm,
Okay.
which he claimed was actually running inside J. I've never looked at JSource, so I can't stand here and certify that. But we just used it directly as APL source in the APL version that Nick was using. I had to change it a little because Roger had written it using Dyalog APL's definitions, and there were squeaky little differences between Dyalog's definition and Nick's definition. Things like the right-hand argument, the right-hand side of a colon can be empty in Dyalog APL and could not in Nick's.
Oh.
So I had to do little changes to it, but it's basically 99 and 44 and 100% Roger Hui code. And what I found bloody amazing was you took a language that was implementing APL in JavaScript, and then you put quad divide in that in APL source. So now you've got two levels of interpretation going on. And not even the one I'm using now, this is 1 or 2 generations ago in tablets, blew away the Amdahl V8 that Joey used to do pricing things that I used to have to justify to customers, because modern computers are so much faster than the things we were dealing with and thought were just awesomely fast back in the early 80s. Or, you know, they're losers compared to the modern stuff, because even with 2 levels of interpretation, it still does big quad divides faster. And
But-
you've got so much memory running that you can do it on operations that are clearly silly. I mean, who the hell needs a 500 by 500 quad divide? I mean,
a
I
lot
don't
of
know if I've
variables.
ever come up with a real life equation that needed more than 3 or 4 arguments. So Joey's 50 by 50 already seemed a little absurd to me, and 500 by 500 is just ludicrous. But whatever. So it's really impressive how those things. And I was thinking of it earlier because I don't remember the exact nature, but the kind of equation that it was in APL 360 and the one that I had seen online and copied into my compiler is probably more like a log n thing. It does iterate. It does try to asymptote to certain kinds of values, whereas Roger found an expression that it doesn't do anything. It's a one pass. You always know exactly how many calculations are going to go on. And I wasn't even aware of that equation existed, although I do remember some high school math, and maybe I was and just didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time.
I think the defense workspace that we ship, I think it has something like an implementation like that, and I think it comes from Roger. So
I could show you the code and you could tell immediately whether you've you've seen that code before, because it's a very delightful style. He uses at least 2, maybe 3 nested verbs inside the primary verb, and it's quite nice. I really enjoyed learning and reading that.
Yeah. Just trying to look for it, but not sure. Yeah, but it's yeah. I just find it sad though that our hardware has gotten so much better, but then the software has managed to more than keep up in slowing things down. So my feeling is that like using Microsoft Word version like 5 under DOS something was a snappier experience than using Microsoft Word today.
Well, I don't really know all the things that involved. One of the things that I noticed as I use Windows machines is I don't know whether it's the, God, I can't even remember what they replaced any files with, but they're basically they've got this one giant structure that they keep everything about.
The registry, you mean?
The registry. Because it doesn't just involve programs, it involves doing a right click on something in a menu coming up and just
Yeah.
all kinds of things. And I have found that, at least with the systems I use, I don't actually keep records, but I would swear to God the damn thing gets slower with age.
Yeah.
Like the longer I use the computer, the more I think, if I had the time and energy, I just reformat this thing and start over, because
Oh, but Windows
this is,
now has that built in. They know that
they
at
do.
Microsoft. So now there's like a button you can press to basically nuke everything and start over
Oh, I
afresh.
didn't know about that. So,
Yeah. So yeah,
oh,
if
I
you
know the thing I
if you
wanted to
search
ask you about
the
was keyboards.
yeah, about keyboards, yeah.
I was delighted to see the APL keyboarding you can do in your Try APL. And I'm curious, is Nick still around? Is he still part of the company?
No, he's definitely not in the part of Dialog anymore. He hasn't been for many years now. But which
Who
keyboarding
came up with that?
which one of them?
One of them looks like the stuff I did for his APL, where you have a prefix character and then
Yeah, okay.
the next character you type. I was lazy and I only did one, but it was clear in the code that you could have stuck any character there you wanted, because the code had one repository location for what the prefix character was. But this other notion, what I think of as a visual APL, where you go I tab and IOTA appears. I love that.
I also think that's very good, and I think we should do more about that. So the system used in TryAPL with we call it the backtick, but it's really a prefix key thing. That was carried over into the RIDE interface, which is like a remote IDE. That's the default GUI for Dialog on non-Windows platforms, but it can run on any platform. And it's also used for remote connections. So you use it on one computer, but the APL is actually running on another computer. That's what's called RIDE, is remote IDE.
Right.
But we didn't carry over this ability to compose ASCII symbols that you can type with a normal keyboard into APL symbols on a visual basis. And I also think that's much easier in a way to learn for a newcomer,
I
because
agree.
it's if you forget what it
For
is, you just
me, I was
think
an old
about it.
timer, so I know where all the APL characters are on the keyboard.
Yeah.
So I was okay with this notion of a glyph and then the stuff. But now that I see that, I think that may have saved a lot of us that gave up on APL because of the keyboarding. Because, geez, if I could find a reserved key somewhere in a type, I could even do that in a text editor. I could have
Yeah.
glyph remain, and the stuff would be that way. And then when I imported it, boof, it would magically become the right
Yeah,
character.
I mean, many editors have the ability to automatically transform sequences of characters like that, but
Yes,
but
exactly.
you kind of have to be able to send it the signal that I want to convert this, because
Yeah.
some sequences make perfect sense combined or not. For example,
Yeah,
less than the negation of
yeah.
it's
You
not.
clearly need the indication of what you want and the transformation indicator. I agree with that totally. And
But it could. I mean, there are ways that could be done
that
somehow.
could be done even in a way. Let's, for example, postulate that the escape key, almost unused in modern computer systems, actually had a glyph associated with it. You could do less than, greater than, and whatever that glyph was, and that would be sitting there in your text. But if you imported it, boom, it would be
Yeah,
diamond or whatever that is.
some people were
That's tedious,
contemplating.
but it's better than having an editor where you cannot create the things you want.
No, I
But it's
understand that,
better
but why
still to
wouldn't?
have something that does the transformation, because then all the other capabilities of the editor would be there. You could search for the diamonds in the text with your text editor and so forth. And since there's already in many editors, certainly the ones I use, the ability to enter things like \n to say line feed and so forth, when you're doing searching,
Yeah.
it would be really nice to be able to search for APL characters without having to go find one and paste it into the search portion of the app. And it's just,
But you might then come to a question on why at all use the APL characters. And if you used a mnemonic and visually similar construction of two ASCII symbols, then with some kind of indicator characters, now that's what you want. Say, for example, less than minus is left arrow. And let's say that you had a way to indicate that it shouldn't be less than and minus, it should be combined. So one way actually to do that would be a backtick. Backtick is lightweight visually. It's easy to type and it's not used for anything in APL. So let's say you write backtick less than minus, for example. And that would mean, backtick means combine the next two characters to be an APL glyph.
right.
At that point, you could say, why even use the APL characters, right? You might as well just
Well, I can
use
tell you
that.
what mine would be. I like it because as a notation, much as I'm beginning to like J as a computing tool, I still prefer the elegance of glyphs. I like the aesthetics of a notation, and as a notation, I prefer the
actual
single
glyphs.
glyph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
now
I think there's still value in having the glyphs, and I dealt with that for some time writing my thing. In fact, that's what persuaded me that I really preferred having source over workspaces.
right.
I could put it in a source code control system. I can write just as I do in J. I could write my definition of all my verbs not in some strictly alphabetical form, but in terms of telling a story. Here are the functions that provide this capability. Here are their support functions. Here are the functions that provide this capability, and here's their support functions. And
Right.
maybe there's even a group at the bottom that here are the support functions that everybody and his mother uses. And I actually write code that way. And I find looking at and coming back to code with those kind of files available is just far more illuminative. I guess one could say I stole the idea from one of Joey Tuttle's faves, which is Donald Knuth. Joey got really involved in tech because of Knuth, and he got really involved in character imagery design. I think he
Okay.
was already somewhat interested because of his role in the IBM 3270, but he got even more involved in it when we bought a Mergenthaler there at IPSA, and he started producing his papers on it. And there is some real value in having a notation, and
No, I understand that,
the
but
notation that the glyphs are a really good aesthetic. It's not crucial for programming. I agree. It took me a
I mean,
while to-
I'm very much into using the glyphs as well. But here's the thing. I don't know if anybody's even explored this. Do you know about ligature programming fonts?
No, I don't.
So
I've heard
in
the phrase, but I don't know what it means.
okay, so in many programming languages like C, they use double or even triple glyphs to mean things. For example, in C, single equal is assignment and equal equal is comparison,
I'm familiar with that,
right?
and
And less
some
than
have
equal
an
is
equal. It means something else, and I've read the rules and I've already forgotten them.
right. So there are these new fonts using all smart features of today's systems where that recognizes that whenever a less than and an equal sign are adjacent, it displays it on screen as a less than an equal sign that has a double width or it's centered in two character spaces like
Oh,
that.
that's sweet. That's
So
sweet.
it's terrible for APL because
No, because
because
it
the APL doesn't
violates
need
our
that.
rules. But if
Yeah.
you're learning this other language, yeah,
Yeah,
understood.
yeah, something combined, like it might not be so obvious that exclamation point equal means not equal, but then they will combine it to a glyph that's kind of halfway between exclamation point equal and not equal sign, something like that. Or in some languages they actually use equal/equal to mean not equal, and then it will combine it to be something that actually looks like a not equal sign. Those kind of examples. We're joining glyphs together that belong together. And there one could imagine, let's say that we adopted something like that visual clue thing. That's basically what those things are, right? When you write less than equal sign in some language like that, what you actually mean is it should have been less than or equal, right? But we don't have the glyph for it, so we just put them next to each other for similarity. And there you could imagine a programming font that says, okay, whenever you have a backtick, for example, followed by 2 ASCII characters, then it displays an alternate display form for those. Replaces all 3 characters with the APL symbol. Then you solve 2 things. You solve the input method. You don't need any special APL keyboard to type APL. And you solve the problem of storage. Right? It's plain ASCII now that you're
Right.
writing. And the only requirement instead, so right now you need both an APL font, because even though you can usually do without an APL font, most systems will display APL just horribly without a special APL font. So you need an APL font and the keyboarding setup and the storage of files that can be mangled. And you could then get something that both looks nice, it's easy to read, and you don't have the keyboarding and so on. I don't know if this would be pleasant to use.
Well, you know, some of it we had listening to you, I realized we'd been using some of that for years in APL. In fact, the code, some of it referred to it as the dark and moral side of APL. We had this expression in APL that said character backspace character actually meant something.
Yes, absolutely. In the old days, character backspace character did actually work, right? And although I'm not sure, I've asked this question before some people whether APL 360 and those type of systems, did they actually store, like if you wrote
No, they stored the
like
glyph. I know exactly.
they stored the
what
whole
they
composed glyph, right? They didn't store it as backspace something. It
No,
was only for printing purposes.
It was only for input purposes.
But for printing,
they didn't transmit it. It was stored internally as the glyph. And
so for printing, it would actually send the glyph, and then the printing terminal, typewriter, whatever, would decompose it into 2 into multiple movements of the
No,
printhead?
no, this was purely a function of input.
So how did
When
it,
you were sitting and typing at an APL system, and if you
Yeah.
typed character backspace character, it would compose that character into the glyph.
but let's say you store the
You'd have
character vector.
overwritten it on the scene, but that was your action. Once you'd done that action, the APL system stored, let's say I don't know for a fact that was equal // but let's say it was.
Yeah.
The system would have stored a not equal symbol.
But what
What
about when it
that
needed
was
to,
quad A.
if it needed to
when it
print
was
it back, like if you listed the contents of a function, you need to write
You
that out.
you either had an output that would deal with that, or you didn't get it.
So didn't it try
There
the
were two
terminal?
modes in APL 360. One mode was assuming you have an APL type ball, and one mode was assuming you don't have an APL type ball.
So if you don't have an APL type ball, it doesn't really
You
stand a
go
chance.
into a mode, you hit the right paren that I believe was over the 0 instead of the right paren that was next to the bracket.
Oh, okay.
And based on which right paren you entered, it signed you on with one of the two sets of behavior.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there was no way to produce APL characters if you signed on as being a ASCII terminal user.
So that would be for those people who were using such a system back in those days when systems were written.
But they were not programmers.
Right. So they knew that to log on and type start, and then the application would run and ask them questions and print reports and so on. And they had no clue that they were actually issuing APL, even APL function names. They would type in and they would think that there was a special DSL that they were using, but it was actually just an APL expression. Right?
It's just an APL program, right?
Right. So okay, I see. But okay, but even then, so if you logged in APL mode, and you had APL type ball, the APL type ball didn't have all the APL glyphs on it either. Right? It also had to compose.
No.
So it had both.
In the early days of APL 360, I don't believe there were any overstruck symbols. I believe
well, there was IBeam, no? IBeam was encode and decode on top of each other.
Maybe you're right.
And dollar sign was S with a modulus, and the cent was
I'll have to look at a picture of an old APL 360.
I can't believe that they would have enough positions for that.
Well, what you're forgetting is it didn't have lowercase. There is
true.
one character that I know for a fact was overstruck, and that was the overstruck alphabet.
Yes, for sure.
So I know there were some, but for all the rest that you're asking about, I'm pretty sure if you had the APL type ball installed, you lost a bunch of ASCII characters because the mapping was.
Oh, no,
See, there's the quad and the left center equal and so forth.
Yeah, so those are not overstruck. Those are because you can't.
No, they're there. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Other
no, but
than the letters overstruck, I don't remember any of the APL characters not being on the.
So it would have well divide. So some of them were pre-composed like this. But for example, domino, was that not just a quad with a division sign?
You may be right. I'd forgotten about.
And same thing. Quote quad was an actual quote and a quad. But some of them I'm sure had pre-composed forms because you don't want to.
There were some composes. There's only one manufacturer that I know of that was privy to the real craziness, and that was the HP. I believe it was called a 2641A. And it actually knew about the dark and moral side of APL. So if you typed on it, the composition would take place on the screen. You'd see the character pixels.
Oh, yeah, kind of thing.
When you did the overstrike.
So this ball has we can see here approximately 10 columns of 4 characters each. So meaning we have 40 characters on this side of the ball and 40 characters on the other side of the ball, giving us at most 80 characters. Now
Yeah, but what
from
you've
those
done is you've lost all the things that were associated with the non-shift positions.
yeah, sure.
So you would have a uppercase L for you typing a lowercase L, and
Right.
you'd have a quad for you
Sure,
typing.
but 80 characters altogether, did that really cover both?
No, you've already pointed out some that I wasn't thinking of. I
Yeah,
don't believe there's a quad divide you'll find on there. I don't believe there's a quad you'll find on there.
Possibly it had an exclamation point, even though that could be composed.
I
From
believe it had an exclamation point. I believe any character that you could type with one character.
Yeah,
one
and those things that
keyboard
you actually needed
was
to,
sitting on the ball.
right? So it wouldn't have had, for example, delta style for grade and del style. Those you had to compose.
Yes.
So maybe
You
it
had
did.
to
Maybe it
compose
was
them.
actually. So there was a key for division, even though you could compose a minus and a colon.
That's correct.
Being that it's so the golf ball very much
The
corresponded
things
to the
that you could
keyboard.
see on the keyboard, the things that you could see without composition, those had similar, had the same character sitting on the type ball.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I look at my keyboard,
But the
then
characters that required composition because they didn't exist on the typewriter. Not that you were doing it because you knew about APL and you knew it would recognize it anyway, but
right.
because it actually requires a composition. Those were done output. So I
So
was wrong.
we can't see exactly how many columns there are here, but then it seems to me that the type ball very much corresponded to the keyboard. So if we look
Yes, it does.
if I look at my keyboard now, from the 1 key to the 0 key, that's 10. And then there are 4 rows and all of them have a full. So that's exactly those 40. And then there are
Right.
another 8 keys that are not in regular columns on the keyboard. So that would mean an additional 2 columns. And that maybe I'm counting this not right on the golf ball, or maybe there were a couple of
Well,
buttons that weren't right
you're
there.
in the vicinity already. If there are 40 characters you see on the keyboard and there are 80 characters you see on the type ball, then
That seems like it would have been the
there's the
corresponding.
base character and there's the shift character.
Yeah, exactly. And then my keyboard might have some keys that weren't there. Like I don't think there was like the backtick key and all the symbols that are on that key just wasn't relevant. And I have a European keyboard, so that's another key that goes away. And there are probably another couple that could go.
Oh, there were some interesting games you had to play to support European keyboards.
Yeah. So
But internally, regardless of whether you had to type it overstrike or not, internally, quad was the character in quad
yes,
AV.
that has that. But then if it needed to print,
But then some
it would
characters
backtrack. or
had
something.
to be translated into overstrikes in order to be seen. So
Right.
some were transmitted as character backspace character.
But okay, but this is actually I haven't really thought about that. We've been looking into a lot lately into the keyboarding problem because the methods that we have used so far for keyboarding on the Windows do not work anymore on the Windows 11 in certain applications.
Oh, really?
And more, so it doesn't work in these modern apps, things that are on Windows.
Well, I love the opportunity to use try APL, but until I saw that you had this keyboarding solution, I really hate typing stuff in.
So I have created a keyboard inspired by that for Windows, where it doesn't use like a completion characters. In try APL, use the tab character to combine 2 characters after you have written them. And I have instead done such a thing that there's the right side Alt key on the keyboard that most Americans don't know about, and it's not used on American keyboards at all.
Yes, they are distinguished in the key codes you receive.
Right. So,
Take
so
care to try that in a few browsers, because the different browsers are, in my experience, they can't make up their bloody mind. There is
no,
no standard that I'm aware of what numeric you get back for all kinds of things.
it is a problem. And even on Windows, that right side alt key is often, if maybe even most often, conflated with control alt. So it's really supposed to be separate, but many programs consider it equivalent to keeping control down and pressing the left side alt.
Well, that's also part of the problem.
But I made a keyboard.
I've obviously found a lower level to work at, and I think you guys do too.
Yeah.
But when I started to write it, I was just using standard .NET, and there were all kinds of characters that were in automatic menu actions. Control F, for instance, was in practically every app. Not Control, Alt F was. Y'all used Control. Bob actually used Alt the way I was used to, and that worked back on PCs, but it doesn't work in modern systems because everybody and his mother uses Alt something or other to bring up menus, or at least did in Windows.
And Control for various shortcuts, so we're all out of keys.
Yes, exactly.
A few years ago, Microsoft started forcing hardware manufacturers to put on one or two new keys on the keyboard, the Windows key and the menu key.
Oh yes.
And I think we should simply pressure all the manufacturers to add a dedicated APL key to the keyboards. That's just what we need. Every computer should ship with an APL key.
I think this other way is fruitful, to really research the idea, going further and further with this visual form of entry. And the trick is to find some specifier key. I don't care whether it's prefix, infix, or suffix. Just find something that says combine these things, because I really mean them to be an APL glyph.
So I have an APL keyboard layout that can be installed on Windows. It's using Microsoft's own technology. So supposedly it would work, except it doesn't work anymore in modern apps in Windows 11. So we have to look into that. But other than that, if you're not on Windows 11 and using modern apps, then it works like this: that you hold down the right side Alt key, and then you press you type in your normal way the first ASCII glyph that you want to combine. So that kind of means this glyph, but don't type it yet. I want to compose it with the next glyph. And then you type the second one and they compose. So for example, if you write Alt less than and then greater than, you get a diamond.
Well, I use something called the Hacker keyboard, and it's got something like that in it, but I could never get any feedback from the developer about how I'd go about creating he supports all kinds of national languages, but I couldn't get any feedback about whether
you're using the Hacker's keyboard on your tablet, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, but there is a version of the Hacker's keyboard, a fork of the version of the Hacker's keyboard, which is for APL. I'll give you the link.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
I'll send it to you. So yeah, that's then you can just it's basically just an extension of the normal Hacker's keyboard. So you just uninstall that and use this instead, or whatever, whichever you want.
That's great.
And yeah, that seems to work very well. And
that's a wonderful keyboard, because I'm so used to having the full ASCII keyboard, and all the others do some kind of half-witted keyboard.
Yeah, the same thing goes on.
I've been using this keyboard for decades. I don't want to change now. Maybe my kids don't bother with it, but I can't fucking use a computer which doesn't have the full keyboard on it.
I have the same issue with laptops. Why does every laptop manufacturer insist on mangling the IBM?
Mangling and put things in different
IBM,
places.
yeah, and put and add
quotes up here, no quotes over there, no.
Yeah, and
put it to the left of the shift or space on.
I have seen the most ridiculous things.
What were you thinking?
They weren't actually intending to use this solution.
Keyboard methodology that everybody uses. I wouldn't buy that fucking piece of shit.
I know. My previous laptop, it had a home key, but no end key. Like, what were you even thinking? Okay, maybe people don't use home and end, but you can't tell me they use home, but they never use end. There's no way.
See, that's another thing I really love about the hacker's keyboard is they have a function key you can see all the F keys, you can see the home, the end, you can do control home, control end. I mean, if you're working with a text editor, and that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize, on a lot of the many tablets, they recognize all that stuff. They don't publish it. It's not in their
No.
documentation.
I know.
But if you're sitting there and you're going, well, I want to get back to the top of the screen. Well, I'll do a control home.
Yeah, except you can't find the home key.
Well, but on devices where it's there, it works. And on devices like the hacker's keyboard, it may be a little hidden, but it still works.
Yeah, of course. One of the most profound experiences I've ever had with a smartphone was that phone had something called USB to go. That means that you can plug in devices into the USB port. Now, that phone at that time, it used the micro USB port, but you can have a micro USB to regular USB-A converter. That's nothing. And then you can plug in a USB powered device, or you can plug in a dongle with multiple USB ports, and you can plug in multiple devices. And so you can plug in a mouse and a keyboard, a physical keyboard, because they're just USB devices. The amazing thing is we think of Android as something very different. But the moment you plug in a mouse into an Android device, it shows a mouse pointer on the screen.
Yes.
It just detects that and it puts a mouse pointer in. And all of a sudden you have this mind-blowing experience that, wait a minute, this is just another Linux machine.
It's another bloody computer. I haven't actually done that. I really
and the same thing for the keyboard. All of a sudden, you can use Alt-Tab to switch applications and control home and end and page up and page down. All these things.
It followed under the covers. It's really
it's just a Linux. It
it's
really
just a
is a
version of
Linux.
Linux with their own little special things added to the
But
API.
it's a whole lot less special than you think it is once you use a mouse and a keyboard instead of your fingers.
Well, Jay, and I've actually also had a term key. The vast majority of the Unix commands are sitting there. You can do a diff, you can do a sort. There's a full-blown, by and large, full-blown Unix sitting there under the cover, not doing anything.
You can even install a terminal emulator application and a file finder application that you can do.
Running Unix commands and having a whole fully Unix session. I hardly ever used that because for years I was encouraged to do things that way with GitHub. And then I realized, all I ever do is check things in and check things out. I don't actually use it as a true repository, doing status of updates and comparing them to previous. I use it as my publishing platform, and I can do all that via browser. So I stopped using sessions to control GitHub. I just pull things up or pull things down. That's all I do with it anymore.
So I'll try to look into it. It's a bit, I don't know much about this kind of modern font construction thing, but it would be interesting to have a ligature font, but in the APL system supports this kind of thing, so that you don't need any special support. You just literally type some kind of character that's used as a combination character that you would never see, and
like
then it would show.
I honestly believe as soon as I saw that, I started thinking, geez, I might never have gone to Jay if I'd ever thought of this.
Jay almost seems like a poor man's version of that, right?
Well, they actually thought about it in the early days. I knew what Ken and Roger were working on before we actually closed down the IPSA Palo Alto office. And they were actually looking at mappings in the early days.
Right.
Eventually, Roger came to the opinion that they had so many characters that you could never really do it with the old APL approach. And I'm like, oh, BS. Have you ever looked at how big UTF-8 is. I mean, we're talking millions of characters. If that's where you think the language is going, goodbye. You know, I'm barely able to learn all the functionality. In fact, I haven't really even tried to learn all the functionality they've shoved into J.
Right. I think to a certain extent it became in J that they made the spelling scheme. All the ASCII characters followed by themselves, followed by a dot, followed by a colon. And then they tried to fill that design space with useful stuff. And it became a bit
Jay is
bloated.
eventually caught on to some mistakes they made. So there's some things that were in there. I can't remember what it was, derivative, or I can't remember what it was, but there used to be a D dot and a D colon, and
Yeah, and they
taken them
removed
out.
those, yeah,
I
because
mean,
they weren't.
it's like, you know, come on, who the fuck uses J to do this stuff with? And what the hell's wrong with loading a script to do it? If you can, in fact, that's why I felt in the very early days about quad divide, because it really seemed like an embarrassment. It seemed like admitting there's this complicated thing that some engineers may want to do, but it'll run like a piece of shit if we did it in APL. So here's this symbol.
There was one thing missing, I would say. What they were missing was the power operator. Because now you
They
could do, you
really
could,
thought through. They were barely
course not.
aware that they were the early days. In fact, the early days didn't even have scan.
no, I know. And operators as a class of things wasn't a thing yet. It wasn't, nobody
Well, it
recognized
had
that.
been thought out. You wouldn't do outer product the way you do it if you'd really been thinking of
No, I
operating.
understand. I understand why they did it the way they did, but the
Once
thing
you
is,
realize it, once you begin to look at it, and I know I went through that transition phase. We were dealing with that in Sachs. We were just beginning to ask ourselves, okay, how much of this can we unleash on the public? How much can a user create a user-defined function that does some of this stuff?
yeah,
And then I went off to a different career, and it wasn't until I got back and I was looking at what Bob had done with NARS 2000 and what Jay had done, and went, oh, this is amazing. The one thing that nobody seems to have followed Jay on, which I have mixed emotions, because the piece of me that wants the possibility of a compiled future says, okay, that's really going to mess with syntax. But on the other hand, in terms of capability, it's fantastic. And that is, they have this rule that says if you're writing what other languages would call an operator, what J calls either an adverb or
a conjunction, yeah.
conjunction, if you don't specify the left and right function arguments,
Yeah.
then you have something that can answer the question I saw in APL Quote Quadr somewhere decades ago. Mathematics define the function. Can Iverson define the operator? Who defines operators? Well, that definition of an adverb or conjunction means you can return anything. You can return a noun like you were a verb. You can return a function like you were an operator. You can return an operator like you're God.
Yeah.
And I know why they did it, but I never even thought of it until I got to looking at colon. And colon is an operator. And it takes a number on the left that says, what kind of thing would you like to do?
Mhm.
And then either a number on the right, which says take input from the fucking keyboard, or a character string that says, here's its definition. And so that's how they do it. And I used it and realized, oh, now in J, I can grab the copy buffer and have a conjunction that takes one left argument, and the left argument is, what do I want to create? So I copy some text from the keyboard, and if I give it a 0, then what I'm gonna use or assign to something is a character vector. And if I give it a 1, it's gonna be an adverb. And if I give it 2, it's gonna be a conjunction. And if I give it 3, it's gonna be a verb function. And it's like, hell, this is powerful as shit. I can do programming on my screen by
Right.
nothing more than writing on the screen and then copying it and then assigning that to a name, giving it whatever type I want to give it. Now, I realize for lots of editors, side-by-side editing is great. But for little clunky line at a time, I don't know really what I'm doing. I'm going to gather this concept up in pieces. The ability to keep putting more functionally into it by accretion is really kind of nice. But I'm also seeing, I know you guys do side-by-side editing, and the J team has now started to produce a web version.
Right.
I don't know whether they saw your try APL or what, but they decided that
They definitely did.
J Playground has a similar model to your online system. It's got execution on the left and an editor on the right.
Well, but TriAPL doesn't have that.
No, but your online, your
Our IDE has
your
that. Yeah.
public system.
Yeah,
you do
that's true.
NED or
Yeah,
whatever you do.
Yes, absolutely.
It works like that, and that's a very nice way of working. They do have, I think when you guys first released Try APL, you couldn't define multi-line functions. Is that right?
That's correct. There's only fairly
But that's
recently in this.
confirmed.
Yeah.
But you still don't seem to have any ability to do debugging. You
No,
can't stop on an error.
no, and
Do you
that's
know whether
because.
there was any reason you had that constraint? Was there any concern?
Oh yes, I
about
know. I can tell you exactly why that is. And that is TriAPL is actually kind of deceptive. It looks like and it emulates an interactive system. Everybody gets fooled. It looks exactly like an APL session. Actual fact,
Oh, but it's
it
not
isn't.
happening. It's more like Nick's thing, where you go back
Yes.
and execute everything again and go at the.
Well, it doesn't do that. It's cleverer than that. What it does is it preserve it kind of goes on forever,
Oh,
but
it preserves the state, and then
yeah.
when you come back, it says, given this state, what do you do with that statement?
Yes, exactly. And then it sends back the output and the new state. So the server is stateless. And it could be distributed to
Got
any
it.
number of servers. They don't care. So the only thing that the front end sends along a 4-element vector, which is a compressed, hashed, whatever, salted, encrypted state. And then then the size of it and some key for it, if you remember right, and then an input. And then what it gets back from the server is a new state, again encrypted. You can't actually see what's there, and then with some hash and a size, and then the output, and then it just keeps going around like that.
Well, that's much more performative than what they've done. They were just interested in getting a hack up and running, so they're actually running instances of the interpreter.
But that's expensive.
Oh, it's expensive. It's not something that would scale.
No, and also it's
does mean
potentially
that
dangerous.
play with-
How do they protect the server?
I've asked them about that, and they claim that they're running in some kind of environment, and the actual list of files is actually destroyed and recreated every time you sign on.
Interesting.
So
that
I
doesn't
shouldn't
seem to
say
sound
sign on.
performant.
Every time you load the base web page.
Okay.
I don't know.
But that means that even if that's the case,
do with DLLs and get outside that environment. So I don't really know how secure it is.
That would mean that it potentially should be possible to trash at least your local copy. I mean, your own copy.
You can definitely destroy yourself.
Whereas TriAPL uses
go in and erase a few files and make your interpreter unrunnable.
Okay.
But all
So-
that would happen to you, have a damaged system, and as soon as you restarted the browser, you don't even have to leave the browser. All you have to do is set the recycle thing, and you'll be back in a clean copy.
right.
Really, I've been fine on it. Just an instantaneous. Oh, you asked for this web page? Oh, here it is. But you're always in a clean space.
So TriAPL instead use and always has used a whitelist of things you can do. So it analyzes all your code.
I've noticed that they have very few things they don't support. There are a few things that don't work.
Where are
but
you talking about? On TriAPL or on the J thing?
on the J thing?
Oh, yeah.
TriAPL, it's been quite obvious. I wouldn't say I've done a thorough examination. I'm quite not the. I never went through that stage of mean little kid trying to destroy systems.
Oh, and TriAPL now finally after years, TriAPL is completely, the whole stack is open source. And permissively licensed. Anybody can make their own version of TriAPL if they want, and run it. So everything is completely in the open. The whitelist is in the open, and the method for checking the code that coming in is in the open. But that's why it has to keep the state encrypted, right? Because it does the checking at input time, almost exclusively. So that means we cannot let you construct your own state, because then it could be constructed including things that are dangerous. Instead, we rely on the state being secure, because every time the state arrives, we check its hash, and then see if it matches with what we have on the well, it's not hash. That's not exactly how it works. But I think what we do is we compute a hash on the state.
But everything's basically based
yeah.
on what IP address started the session with you, right?
No. Well, I mean, it's just a request. You just send a request with the state to the server, and the server responds back again.
The state back at the browser, so I'm sending you back the state.
Yes, the state is only stored on the local on the user side.
What I type plus invisible to me.
Yes,
I'm sending you some state information that tells the server, oh, here's a request from this state.
yeah, exactly. And then it just updates the state and sends it back with the output. That has some benefits that the server doesn't care. We never store any of your information. Notice that TriAPL does not pop up at cookies banner, whatever. We don't care. We don't keep any of your anything at all. We have no notion of what you just did. Also your state lives on your local machine at all times, which means if you lose the connection or something, your state is there. You can there's also a download button on the file tab that you can use to download your state, and you can upload your state. You can send it to your friends. You can even load a state from, I think.
I looked at that. That's totally unreadable.
What?
Clearly, you have encrypted whatever you.
Oh yeah. No, it's unreadable, but you can share a state with your friends.
Right.
And then here, load this, run this, right? And then have a look at my stuff. Which is kind of nice. Like workspaces, basically, is what it is.
Right.
But it has to be encrypted, because otherwise the server is at risk.
A truly supportable high level. This is a toy.
Oh yeah, it was never intended to be a production system. We don't want you to do that, right? Currently, it's just running on a single machine, and there's no load balancing for anything. I don't
expect them to ever take it to production. I'm just, it's the one thing they don't do that I'm kind of sorry they don't. But it's not the end of the world.
Oh, but there is such a thing. I mean, there are Docker containers that you can run. And there are systems online that you can run a Docker container in the cloud, so you have nothing on your own computer. So if you've had a look at the APL wiki, right? I believe.
The page that.
Well, just in general, the APL wiki, the website, the APL wiki.
No, not really.
Okay, so there's a lot of information there, including an article called "Running APL." And under I haven't tried it for a while, so I don't know if it still works, but it should work. Under running APL, under Dyalog APL, it has some entries for Gitpod and bind, yeah, and also using Jupyter notebooks for binder and Gitpod. And that basically is a whole container, including the IDE. And the whole thing lives online on GitHub. And you run it on an online system. And it just opens up a normal looking Dyalog IDE, and you can do everything entirely online, nothing on your computer. So if that's what you want, you can do that.
Oh, I don't want it, but the only
No, but
thing I
it's-
wanted from the J community was at least some slight thing about debugging, but I don't think they're going to provide it.
Yeah. Well. So
But they're not trying to be a true server-based system like you're providing. And the other one that's been around for ages. Back in the early 2000s, when I was working for Thomson, actually the company I worked with was called Dyalog, which every time I mention in an APL community, people want to know why I'm spelling it wrong.
That's good.
Anyway, Windows had that kind of thing where you could, and they ran some Windows servers up in somewhere in Minnesota, Eagan, Minnesota, just outside of, I forget whatever the name of the big city is up there. And you just sign on and you could have a system running whatever kind of software. I actually had one little thing where we emailed people reports that they wanted further processing done to. And I had a little program that ran in whatever Microsoft email is called.
Outlook.
Outlook, that's the guy. Because maybe still today, I haven't used Microsoft products in ages, but they had Visual Basic, the scripting version, plugged into everything. It was in Outlook, it was in Excel, it was in Word.
Visual Basic for Applications, it's called, right? VBA.
Yeah. Well, it was almost indistinguishable from the early version of VB. It wasn't until .NET came along that version became sort of obsolete, because the .NET really is compiled code, whereas the other thing's a pure interpreter. And so I'd get emails that were meant for a customer, but the customer wanted further processing that our mainframe wasn't capable of. Run the transformations, because we had some really cute little transformations where you could be sent a XML file, and then we'd run some pretty nice little transformation software that takes XML files and produces reports in all kinds of formats, because the transformation from XML format to you name it is really straightforward. You don't really do programming. It's more like SQL. It's specification. Here's what the output looks like. You take this field or this subfield and you put it there, and I mean, we had non-programmers in marketing providing transformation formats, and all I had to do was connect up customer A to report B, run this transformation on it. I really wasn't writing a line of code other than the code that said, oh, I got an email. Who's it from? What's the report number that I hear? And so periodically I'd go look at and make sure everything was running okay in the Eagan, Minnesota data center, but nothing was going on. Nothing that was running on my PC was anything that was actually happening on my PC. I was just running a windowing front end. I forget which one we used back then. You're really just looking at another screen. In fact, I'd done that earlier than that. had a person, the interface just boggled my mind that it could be cost effective. And that is, there's really no connection. You're just literally transmitting a bitmap of what's on the screen in
Right.
the session you're looking at. So there's no connectivity between you and that app other than you're like a virtual screen and a virtual keyboard talking
Well,
to a session on another machine that's sitting in a closet with hundreds of other virtual sessions running on it.
yeah, well,
And
today's connection speeds are good enough. You can do this.
well, that's the thing. That's what I don't tend to realize until I go do the arithmetic. Geez, I mean, I don't know what I had back then. It was probably nearer T1 speeds and it was quite performant. Right now, the commercial, and I have one of the cheaper ones. I don't pay for the more expensive multiple gigabit type things. And I looked up the numbers and went, holy chamoly. I have T1 speeds from me to anybody, and I have T3 speeds. No, it's not T1. It's something like multiple, 2 or 3 times. I forget the number of T1 speeds transmitting to people, which is the slow line. And then I have 2x of a T3 speed coming back to me. And I remember the time when we supported, 7 campuses in a TV center and an operations center on 6 56 kb lines. And then 4 or 5 years later, when APL was based in, APL conference was in Dallas, they had I think it was just T1. They were talking about a T3, but they hadn't gotten one of those as a satellite link between the campuses. And you just go. But then I can remember back when we were being told that a 300 baud connection could only go so far, and
Yeah,
you'd
yeah.
need a repeater circuit if you wanted to go another 50 feet down the hallway. So
Listen, Paul,
there's been a lot of mythology over the years about what communications technology can really accomplish, and most of it's complete bullshit.
that's true. Don't make big statements like that. I think we should round off a little bit, as
Yes,
fascinating as it is.
I
I,
appreciate you having this. This is fun.
well,
Hopefully some speaker will show up for
I'll do my best. I've taken contact with a couple of people, see if I hear back from them. And otherwise, if you have contact with any of the old timers, we'd love to have them.
Yeah, I tried a few, but the people I was hoping to be in touch with, I just don't have contacts with anymore.
Yeah.
Do you know, is there anything physically wrong with Bob, or he just have another commitment, or?
Well, but Beneki, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, no, I think it was just that the ideological reasons for not participating. Oh, you joined in later. That's why. That's right. I said it at the beginning. Right, but no, he sent me an email back asking for some details about what would happen in this event. As I told him to go look at the previous recordings, and then he came back to me with a 3-point argument for not participating anyway. First one was gender imbalance. And he's another male, and we'd only had one female, so he think I should do something about that. Second one was the planet is on fire, basically, and we need to look to the future and fixing that. We can't afford to dwell on the past. And the explicit purpose of these sessions is dwelling on the past, so that's a bit, I can't really fix that.
No, you wouldn't want to. Okay, got it.
And then yeah, the third one's kind of connected to the second one, is that what he's actually doing is he doesn't want to be stuck in the past with APL's luggage. He wants something APL like, but modern, fast, compiled, and that's what he's working on to provide data scientists and so on with the tools that they can then use to help the world get into a better state, because it's important now. And I mean, I understand. I totally understand.
Well, that was actually the piece I was hoping to hear him talk about.
Yeah,
I have a fairly long history with Bob, so.
yeah, but
Just-
maybe then this is not the right setting for him. I think he would be a good guest, but not here because this is explicitly navel
you're
gazing
talking
on
about
the past, right?
Memories and what's transpired.
And
up
I
to
think
date.
that's important to, I mean, to use 1 or 2 hours of this a month is what I use, right? I don't prepare anything.
Right.
I think we have to be careful, not just blast off into the future without being careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So it's important to remember those things.
I agree with that.
But of course, most of the effort should be on the future. And so I have suggested that I don't know if you're aware of the Arraycast. You heard about it?
No, I'm not.
So it's a podcast, meaning it's audio only, every 2 weeks. And there it's very much about current things. Some history comes in sometimes, but it's mostly about what's happening now and in the future and big concepts and so on. And I suggested he would be a good guest there as well. So
Yeah, well, I'm just curious to know what he's working on because
Yeah.
that's one area where our sympathies really overlap. I really like looking at ways to take this notation and not be always a slave to it's got to be interpretive.
no, that definitely, and the APL has reasons why it's very difficult.
Performance, well, and we keep adding them. I mean,
Yeah,
like I say, Jay seems to have gone out of its way to add them. The way you do multivariable assignment is to put the variable names in quotes.
yeah, that's yeah.
Well, I know now why they did it. You can do packages really easy because you just package up the names and the definitions, and now it's trivial. But it means you can't compile that crap.
No, and it has some inconsistencies and so on. Whatever. Let's not go into that now. Maybe for
But,
another time.
I agreed. I'm saying I have sympathy with what he's trying to achieve.
Oh, me too.
And I
Absolutely.
don't even disagree with. I'd love to see more women involved in the nature of the product, but unfortunately,
Well, in general, the whole industry is
the only
an
other
issue.
person I can think of who would have some really interesting things to contribute to a group like this.
I asked him then, and I mean, often people give you this non-constructive criticism saying you should fix this, but not any actual feedback about how you can fix it. And he did give me a list of 4 women who had influence on the APL's history. So that's not a bad thing. And I've tried getting a hold of them. I'll keep doing that. I've been busy with things.
That's great. That's great.
So we'll see. I mean, and I can't change history as to who has been doing what, but that
No,
doesn't mean we
no.
can.
I was a manager and I couldn't change history in current time. There just weren't that many people willing to come to work for us.
So
It wasn't
Fine.
just women. There were all kinds of groups that haven't been interested in what we're doing.
that's true. Little by little.
Thank you for having this. I appreciate
No,
it.
thank you, Paul. You rescued the episode. I mean, now people will have something to look at for the next couple of weeks. And so I really appreciate it. There's some real gems in here. So I appreciate that. All the best to you, right?
You too.